and applying it through a public health paradigm to the protection of the public. Now, because the technology is rapidly evolving, it is very important that the baseline information that we have now with regard to the in vitro tests, looking at genetic toxicology and other short-term markers, in vivo studies that we have currently in hand, as well as the human epidemiology, be properly cataloged for future comparisons, because this is the baseline. Now, we need to have a program where the technology, as it evolves, whether it's a handset technology evolution, whether it's an antenna evolving, to change, or any other aspect of the technology, this needs to be monitored. And it needs to be periodically tested to catch or pick up a change in the technology that will render the existing interpretations with regard to the baseline data inadequate. This may never happen, but it needs to be monitored. Now, if we do find changes in technology that will render our current results inadequate, then what we need to do is to reintroduce studies of the in vitro and the short-term nature so that we can then compare the results of these new technologies with the results we got with the existing technologies. This is the only way that we think we can take account of the rapidly changing technology, the need to have rapid response capabilities if something is found that is adverse to human health, and to allow for a balancing of this technology as it grows. One thing that makes this even more interesting is that the wireless industry is not an industry that's out there pushing people to buy phones. People love these things. The wireless industry is doing nothing more than responding to consumer demand. So it's very important that a balance is struck whereby the evolution of the technology can be balanced with protection of public health. The second recommendation is that a passive reporting system is put in place that captures complaints from users. This is going to be very difficult because in the other model where this is applied, the pharmaceutical industry, you have medical professionals in between the public and the reporting system so that complaints are reported by doctors, by pharmacists, by primary care deliverers. We don't have that here. So we're going to have to be creative. But the fact of the matter is that when we look at public health advances over the past century, most of them have come from hypotheses generated through passive reporting systems. I earlier referred to the vinyl chloride angiosarcoma example, the asbestos mesothelioma example. This is very important. These data need to be put and maintained in a database that will facilitate periodic evaluation against the public health paradigm, which is aimed at defining the need for either intervention, research, or further follow-up. In terms of active public health surveillance, we recommend that 3 epidemiological cohorts should be established and followed through record linkage methods. The first is a cellular analog cohort. There is one that is already in place that the WTR has supported. But as I mentioned earlier, we were only able to analyze 1 year of data, 1994. 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998 are all available. The reason we didn't analyze those data is that we got sued. And the lawsuit prevented us from doing the study that we had originally intended to do. We need to establish a digital cohort with cellular frequencies covering both TDMA and CDMA technologies. And then there needs to be a PCS digital cohort with TDMA and CDMA technologies. These cohorts can be established with warranty cards, with user records. There are a number of ways that these cohorts can be established immediately. In the United States and around the world, there are numerous tumor reporting systems. In the United States, we have a national death index. And I believe that record linkage work is probably the most efficient manner in which these large cohorts can be evaluated for early suggestion of potential problems. Now, one thing that you'll notice here is that I'm not anticipating an end to this anytime soon. The reason is that's the way it is with public health, and that's the way it is with surveillance. As Dr. Jacobson from the FDA has said on numerous occasions, and as I believe, post-market surveillance, tracking, and monitoring needs to be looked at by the wireless industry as an ongoing cost of doing business. Nothing less than that will protect the consumers. Now, when you look at what we have learned since 1993, I believe that we need an immediate and comprehensive review of the 1.6 watts per kilogram RF emission standard for handheld wireless instruments. The rationale for this is pretty straightforward. First, the current standard is based on historical data only indirectly relevant to the human exposure situation. In 1992, cellular phones weren't even included because of a low power exclusion. They were added to the standard following that, but with no new data. So that the current standard is a retrofit. As most of you know in this room better than I, historical data are thermal effects oriented. And we believe that if there are any adverse effects from wireless technology, they're not going to be thermal. In the past 5 or 6 years, there have been new exposure systems developed, both in vitro and in vivo, by the WTR and by others, that give us the opportunity to develop directly relevant information. There are exposure systems now that have been engineered to assimilate and to approximate exposures from wireless phones. Some of the exposure systems are even driven by wireless phones now. So that if we have the opportunity to use directly relevant data, we should. a recommendation for how this is done is a process that I believe needs to involve an international regulatory task force. Clearly, wireless communication is global. Clearly, research is being coordinated on a global basis. And clearly, people are the same around the world. So it makes no sense to have different standards. I believe that this is important, and it's something that should be taken up very, very quickly. Now, finally, as some of you know, driving the ship of the WTR, we've hit a couple of waves. And while there's been some acrimony with a number of people, ranging from the industry to scientists to people in the government to consumers, one thing has become very clear to me, and that is this: that while many times I've gone toe-to-toe with Tom Wheeler or Joanne Bazile, at the end of it, it was very clear to me that they were doing their job, that I was doing my job. And that while I had arguments with people from Motorola about exposure systems and about the way data are interpreted, it's clear to me that they were doing their job. I was trying to do mine. And as we discuss all of these scientific interplays here, and as we have over the past 5 years, at every BEMS meeting and at every colloquium, the scientists are doing their job. The difficulty is this: it's clear to me that everybody's doing their job. It's also clear to me that the consumers are not being protected. And that tells me that there's something we have to look at in our system. As I said earlier, the industry is responding to consumer demand. Consumers want this technology. Well, if they want this technology, and there are risks associated with this technology, does it not make sense that consumers absorb some of that risk? Does it not make sense that consumers maybe should be empowered to protect themselves? I don't have an answer to that, but that's a question that's going to have to be answered before this controversy about wireless technology and public health goes away. In closing, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First to Dr. Bill Guy. Bill was one of the original members of the WTR, helped us put this thing together. He's been the driving force in making sure that we were at least within the boundaries of acceptable science with regard to dosimetry and the general EMF field. Special thanks to Dr. Don McCree, who we dragged out of NIEHS. We said this is going to be a tremendous challenge. Dr. McCree has been the director of our extramural research program. He's gotten a lot more publicity than I think he wanted. But all in all, what Dr. McCree has done for us is beyond anything that I can describe. I say thank you to the WTR staff. We've had over 20 staff over 6 years. I counted them up last night. Some of the staff, like Graham Hook, have gone on to work with folks who we had hired. They stole him from us. Underscores how good our staff have been, that other people have tried to take them away. I want to say thank you to the peer review board. Peer review board had a very tough job because they didn't have control over what the WTR did. They hung in there with us. They did peer review. Their criticisms of what we were doing were constructive, always professional, and I think had a lot more impact on our program than they realized. I want to say thank you to the Interagency Working Group, the government group put together in the United States to help keep us on the straight and narrow, provided a lot of input to us, a lot of peer review, and a lot of insight into the currency of how government agencies look at science. They helped us develop information that was going to be usable to them in doing their jobs. I want to say thank you to the industry. Had some ups and downs with the industry, but this industry has acted in an unprecedented, responsible manner, beginning in 1993, funding not only the efforts of the WTR, but also supporting the independence of the WTR. And I know that we caused them some lost nights of sleep, probably going to continue to cause them some lost nights of sleep, but the industry has tried to do the right thing. I believe so far they have. And I want to thank them for that, not as the head of the WTR, but as a fellow who uses a cell phone with a headset for convenience. And finally, I want to say thank you to those of you in the scientific community who have participated in what we've tried to do. Without the scientific community, this would not have worked, would not have been possible, and the public in general would be far worse off than they are now. So with that, I'd like to close. And say that whatever we can do in the WTR to help as this work goes forward, we'll be there. Thank you.